Well, last week we took apart this front axle assembly for this 8-passenger Yellowstone Park Stagecoach. So behind the scenes, I've run everything through the sandblaster, cleaned it up, and have primed it. And I have found identification numbers on this front axle assembly as well. On the left side of the axle, we see the same signature serial number, 26957. And we also see it on this front iron that's going to go onto the Hounds. We have that same number as well, 26957. And on the front of the fifth wheel plate, this is going to be the bottom of the plate, we also have that same 57 that we also found on the top of the fifth wheel plate that is actually on the undercarriage itself. So we need to start going back the other direction. I think first I will cut out our axle cap, get it fitted to the axle, and then we have to lay out the axle hound angles and get that mortise cut because these axle hounds have to be fitted through that front axle cap. And while I'm on the topic of axle hounds, on a standard farm wagon, there are 3 sets of hounds. Now, I use this term somewhat regularly, and it is also used in relation to a mast on a ship. It is supporting angular wood braces that come up and support a single pole or a mast. Those are called hounds. On the back of a tongue, we have a triangular pair of hounds, the tongue hounds, that come and fit in this pie shape to the front axle hounds. And this wedge assembly is what the tongue will pivot on. And you're also familiar now that on the rear axle, there's 2 sets of angular boards that come up to the reach. Those are called the reach hounds or the rear axle hounds. So there are 3 sets of hounds on a farm wagon. On this Stagecoach, there's actually only 1 set of hounds, and that's what comes up through the front axle. There's another term that is used probably less frequently, and that is called a futchel, F-U-T-C-H-E-L, or E-L-L. And it is also referring to an angular wood brace that comes up generally in relation to a carriage pole. If you get into your brewery wagons, your hitch wagons that you're probably all familiar with, the Budweiser style wagon, in that front axle assembly, which is a full fifth wheel assembly, there are some angular hounds that come up to a front crossbar, and these are called futchels. And on English coaches, that front bar is oftentimes referred to as a splinter bar. English European hooks up their horses to a carriage differently than we do here in the West, or more American. Well, those are called futchels that come up to the splinter bar. So they're somewhat interchangeable, but the futchel is far less used today than it is hounds. But in certain carriages or wagons, it is more correct to call these angular braces futchels instead of hounds. So this axle cap needs to go from collar to collar, just like it did on the rear axle. This one's going to be 54 inches. And this fifth wheel plate, this is the top of the plate. This will actually be the bottom of the plate that the axle cap comes up to. This one is 1 7/8. And we'll see that the top of the wood is also 1 7/8. So this fifth wheel plate is going to sit right on top like so. And you can see that it is contoured down to this narrow strap that is captured underneath the axle clips. And our axle is 1.5 inches, so this bottom section has to be rounded down from the 1 7/8 down to 1.5 inches. And you can see just how rotted out this axle cap was. I have some 1 15/16. I'll plane down to 1 7/8. Find me a piece that's 4.5 inches by 54 inches long. Got a piece here. It's got kind of a blemish right there, but I think I can work around that. Make good use of this board for this axle cap. It's going to fit right around, so I should be able to cut this away. So while I've been watching this defect here, I also have one on this top edge. This is where I'd like to put the fifth wheel plate. So I'm going to trim this back about an inch. It'll still give me enough room to cut out this defect on the bottom as well. I think this is the end that was down headed toward the roots. You can see the grain here to where we're almost a vertical grain, just a twist transition here. While on the other end, we're more of a flat grain here. So this is the trunk headed up, and I think the other end is the root section. So our ends are at 1 7/8 inches. So when I bedded the axle cap on the rear axle, I took some body filler and put in between the two, and you saw how I pushed them together so it would squeeze out and give me 100% contact. Well, if you're opposed to that, there is a different way to do it that is probably more correct, perhaps. You can see I've got it shimmed up here on the end by taking a hacksaw blade and putting it between the axle cap and the axle and clamping that in place, and I've done that on both ends, so I have the equal amount of space between the axle cap and the axle on both ends. So then I can take another hacksaw blade, and I like to put a pair of vice grips on one end and feed it through, and sometimes you have to find that open spot when you have some spots that touch and some are open. I've got a spot here that's open, feed it through. Then I can put another pair of vice grips on the other side, and I can feed this back and forth between the axle cap and the axle and find those spots that are tight and work those out. And using the same hacksaw blade, I can get the equal distance all the way through from one end to the other. And being that I'm using a hacksaw blade, it's not going to damage it up against the steel axle. So I can work out those tight spots And in the end, I'm going to have an equal amount of space all the way through. So I've been playing with this a little bit, and I've got most of it pretty clear. I don't know if you remember watching me do this on the borax wagons, but this is exactly the approach I took there. And then when I'm ready to actually put the axle together, I put a coat of Titebond 3 on there. Not so much for adhesion, but as it comes together, it just gives that 100% contact after it's fully assembled. This approach actually takes a little longer to play with, but you can get true wood to steel contact through the whole axle cap. Just another approach. I've got a piece of cardboard laid out that I would like to lay the Hounds out. These are the pieces that I have left. I have 2 feet wide, and I drew a line right down the middle so I can keep this pretty centered up. So I'm putting this sway bar on the Hounds, kind of line those holes up. And between the end of these Hounds, because these notches are still in place, if I measure that, I am at 15.5. Hole to hole, center to center, I am 16.5. So I'm going to come out half of 15.5 is 7 3/4. So center of my holes, if I'm at 16.5, I'm going to come out 8 1/4. My holes are about 2.5 from the end. That should be the center of my holes. So these seem to be 1.25 inches at the joint. This is where the mortises through the axle cap were, center to center through the holes. I am at 14.5. Double check that on the other end. I'm at 14.5. So I'm going to line my holes up on my marks right there. We should line up with my joints right there. So when I was taking this apart, I did measure this distance, and it was 15 3/4. So that same distance to this hole is 16 1/2. 14 1/2 from my center line is 7 1/4. And 16 1/2, that's going to be the center of my bolt on the axle cap. There's the center bolt on the right side. So as we look at the mortise and the bolt hole, on this side it seems to be pretty centered up. But on the other side, you can see we're a little offset. We're not quite as centered. As I lay that down, you can see it's a little more clear here how offset that hole is. So this hole isn't squared up with the mortise here. But as I lay this out, I'm going to try to make it a little more symmetrical. So we are roughly 1 3/4 width at the hole. So I'm going to go there to there is 1 3/4. And since this is coming through at a taper, I'd like it to be the same on this other side. I'm going to take and reverse this. Line up this hole. Line up that hole. That should give us the same angle. So going forward to the tongue, this was the broken piece that was left. Fit right in there. Remember, this was the patch iron that went on top. We're not going to put this back on, but it kind of helps us confirm that that's where that was at. We had measured between these and had kind of calculated that we want to be about 3 inches in between. But it looks like our transition point is right in this area here. So from here, we want to be 3 inches forward at that spot. And then we're going to gradually taper larger toward the tip of these hounds. And we'd also measured from the front of the axle hound forward that we were going to have about 30 inches in length. So I'd like to transfer that over our 30-inch mark. So I'm going to taper this out to a 3.5-inch tongue. There's 3, there's 3.5. So if I use this as my measurement, this is the outside cap. Takes the stress off of that tongue when they're turning. The width of my hounds at the end, I want to be 1.5 inches. Now we just start connecting the dots. This will be the inside of the hounds that will receive the tongue. And we have to start using our imagination a little bit. Try to follow this old one. So here, the carriage bolt. Tell us where that edge is.
Take that forward.
I'm off just a fuzz off of my 1.25 inches. So that should give us a pattern for one hound, and in theory it should be a carbon copy of that one. If I cut this one out, it should also make the copy for the right hand side. So this line here should be the back of the axle. The donut is right under here. I'm going to cut out a spot to relieve that.
It'll sit down flat on the fifth wheel.
Setting like so, these bolts are going to be right in the center of our mortises. So I can just take a square and I'll mark down where the mortises are going to be so I can cut them in the axle cap. Where our side brace irons will go. Looks like maybe this one's a little twisted, but we'll straighten that out when we go together. And then the cap to the ends of our hounds will be right there. Pretty well centered up on our bolts. I think we're headed the right direction. Well, the mortises in the axle hound, as you can see, are at an angle and they have to be tapered as well. And we'll cut out some hounds. Hopefully do that the next time. Appreciate you coming along. Thanks for watching.